There is a wood that built the frontier and grows on every river in America. It puts on 5 feet of height every year, the fastest commercial hardwood on the continent. It does in 20 years what oak takes 80 years to do. For 4 centuries, it framed every house on the northern plains. And in 22 days, in the spring of 1805, 16 men carved 6 dugout canoes from single trunks of the tree, and they rowed those canoes all the way to the Pacific. Then, in a single generation after the Second World War, the American lumber industry buried it. Not because it failed, because it grew too fast. A tree that reaches lumber size in 20 years does not fit a market built on 80-year Douglas fir. A hardwood with a wide, soft grain does not fit grading rules written for furniture mahogany. A species that the Mandan trusted with their roofs for 400 years does not fit a building code written in Tacoma after 1945. The tree that built the frontier became, in the trade press of the United States lumber industry, glorified firewood. This is the story of the cottonwood, the tree that built America and was erased from the building codes that came after. Welcome to Nature's Lost Vault. Before we open this vault, if these stories matter to you, the best way to preserve this knowledge is simple. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share these vaults with those who need to remember what we forgot. The archive opens on the upper Missouri River, sometime in the early 1500s. A village rises before dawn. The river is half iced over. The women of the village are already at work on the frame of a new lodge, lifting 4 enormous posts into the ground at the 4 points of a square. Around the inner square, they set a ring of shorter posts. Across the top they lay rafters, then willow branches, then dried prairie grass, then a heavy skin of sod. In 6 to 10 days the lodge is done. 40 feet across, big enough to sleep 20 people, 3 generations of the same family, through a Dakota winter where the temperature drops past 30 degrees below zero. The posts and rafters are all the same wood, the same species these women's mothers used, and their mothers' mothers, going back to the early 1500s when the first true earth lodges appeared in central North Dakota. There was almost nothing else on the open plains. No oak forests, no pine. Only the trees that grew along the river bottoms. And of those, only one grew tall enough, fast enough, and straight enough to hold up a roof full of earth. That tree is the cottonwood. For 2.5 centuries, the entire built world of the Mandan and the Hidatsa stood on cottonwood posts. The villages on the Knife River and the Heart River, the lodges that European traders sketched and wrote home about, the homes where women owned the building and men slept inside what their wives and mothers had raised, all of it stood on this one tree. By 1600, big Hidatsa Village had more than 100 earth lodges in a single bend of the river, every one of them framed in cottonwood. By the 1700s, French and English traders coming up the Missouri were calling these villages the trading hubs of the northern plains. By 1804, an American expedition arrived. On November 4th of that year, the men of the Lewis and Clark expedition began cutting cottonwood logs along the Knife River to build their winter fort. They named the place Fort Mandan in honor of the people who had taken them in. The walls were cottonwood. The pickets, 18 feet high, were cottonwood. They wintered there through the coldest months on record in that region in years. Sacagawea gave birth to her son inside those walls in February. And then, on February 28, 1805, Captain Clark sent 16 enlisted men into the cottonwood stands along the river with axes and adzes. The order was to hew 6 dugout canoes out of single cottonwood trunks. The expedition needed boats that could carry 20 tons of baggage up the upper Missouri, past the Great Falls, into country no white man had ever seen. The men worked for 22 days. They carved 6 canoes, each about 30 feet long and 3 feet wide, each carved from one tree. Sergeant Ordway wrote in his journal that they moved the canoes along the north side of the line of huts into the shadow to keep the sun from drying them too fast and cracking the wood. On April 7th, 1805, those 6 cottonwood canoes pushed off from the Knife River and started up the Missouri. They carried Lewis, Clark, Sacagawea, her infant son, and the rest of the cause of discovery toward the Pacific. The boats that crossed the continent were cottonwood, carved from single trunks, by hand, in 22 days. 20 years before any of that, a Conestoga wagon builder in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, was selecting boards for a wagon bed. By the time those wagons rolled west and adapted into the smaller prairie schooner, the trees the pioneers spotted first on the empty horizon were also cottonwoods. A column of cottonwood leaves shaking in the wind on a treeless plain meant water below. It meant shade. It meant timber. The pioneers wrote in their journals that they were always glad to see one in the distance. Mules that could not survive on prairie grass alone could be kept alive on cottonwood bark when the grass ran out. For 300 years of American building, the tree was indispensable. The earth lodge, the dugout canoe, the fort, the wagon bed, the frontier house, the barn, the first plywood crate. And then, in the span of a single generation after the Second World War, the entire industry that depended on it collapsed. This is where the story turns. After 1945, the American softwood plywood industry exploded out of the Pacific Northwest. The American Plywood Association's own records describe what happened. For more than half a century, the plywood industry was located almost exclusively in the Pacific Northwest and British Columbia, drawing on the region's vast supply of Douglas fir. The mills scaled into the thousands. The new post-war suburbs, the tract houses, the school buildings, the office construction, all of it was framed and sheathed in Douglas fir. The lumber industry developed a new vocabulary: premium softwood plywood, construction-grade fir, and for the hardwood mills along the Mississippi and the Missouri that still cut the trees the Mandan had cut, a new label: low-grade hardwood, pulp species, crate stock. The grading rules came from the National Hardwood Lumber Association, an industry body that had set the standard for hardwood lumber grading since 1898. The rules were written for furniture manufacturers. They valued one thing above all else: the size and number of clear, defect-free cuttings that could be taken from a single board. They were written for slow-growing, dense, decorative hardwoods: oak, cherry, walnut, hard maple. A tree that grew 5 feet a year produced a board with wider grain and softer fiber. Under the corporate grading rules, the cottonwood board scored at the bottom. It was sorted into the cheapest bins. The American furniture industry stopped buying it. Architects stopped specifying it. Trade journals began calling it glorified firewood. The Mandan would have stared at that. For 4 centuries, this was the tree the women of the village trusted with their roofs, the tree Lewis and Clark trusted with their lives on the Missouri, the tree the pioneers blessed when they saw it on the horizon. By the 1960s, in the trade press of the American lumber industry, it had become a weed. What changed was not the tree. What changed was who got to define value. The Douglas fir mills had built the post-war suburb. The mixed hardwood mills along the Mississippi had built the original American settlement. One of those stories got written into the building codes. The other one got buried. But the biology has not changed. The eastern cottonwood is still the fastest-growing commercial forest species in North America on record by the USDA's own data. In the Mississippi River bottoms, height growth of 10 to 15 feet per year is common. The tree that takes an oak 80 years to reach, The cottonwood reaches in 20. The same conditions that made the corporate lumber industry call it weak, soft, and fast are the conditions that made it the right wood for an earth lodge, a fort wall, a dugout canoe, and a wagon bed. The wood is light. It does not split when nailed. It holds paint well, which is why early American carriages used it. The bud resin of the cottonwood, what country apothecaries used to call balm of Gilead, is still sold today by herbalists for $30 an ounce. The Mandan villages on the Knife River are now a National Historic Site, with a replica earth lodge that visitors can walk inside. The 4 center posts of that lodge are cottonwood, like the originals. There is almost certainly a cottonwood within walking distance of where you are sitting right now. Along every river in America, in every floodplain, in the seam of soil along every levee. They are easy to spot in the fall when their leaves turn bright yellow against the blue sky and shake in the wind like coins. The pioneers used to navigate by them. So can you. In a small custom sawmill in central Missouri today, a cottonwood log sits on the saw bed. The sawyer is in his 60s. He learned the trade from his father, who learned it from his. He runs the carriage forward, looks down at the trunk, and rests one gloved hand on it. The blade starts to turn. The tree the Mandan called by another name, the tree that carried Lewis and Clark to the Pacific in 6 hand-carved canoes, the tree the corporate lumber industry called a weed, is going back into board lumber. One log at a time, where the river still runs. If this vault changed how you see the trees on your own horizon, do not let this knowledge disappear again. Subscribe to Nature's Lost Vault and hit the notification bell. The next vault opens soon.